My family worshipped their golden boy son and dismissed my efforts, until they needed me to save his life, and I showed them the truth they tried to bury. My name is Evelyn Harper. That morning, just as I was about to walk into a critical emergency case, my phone buzzed inside the pocket of my white coat. A nurse from another hospital was on the line, her voice cautious. "You're listed as the only next of kin, but the file clearly states, 'Do not contact Evelyn Harper.'" The person lying in the intensive care unit was my own brother, and yet my entire family had erased me from everything, even in the face of death. I grew up in the northern suburbs of Minneapolis, in a house with a neatly trimmed lawn and a white picket fence that was repainted before every holiday. From the outside, everything looked like a page out of a perfect family magazine. But inside, there were empty spaces no one dared to touch. I lived in that house like a long-term guest, present but never truly belonging. Every dinner was like a stage play I was never cast in. My father sat at the head of the table, always opening with the same question. "How many points did Luke score today?" My brother, the family's golden boy, would beam as he recounted some perfect pass or game-winning tackle that lit up the whole team. My mother would pile more food onto his plate and repeat her favorite line. "You're our pride and joy." I'd sit there pushing bland mashed potatoes around my plate, waiting for someone to ask me something, anything. But no one did. No one remembered that earlier that day I was publicly praised by the principal for scoring a perfect grade in biology. No one noticed the notebook I always carried, filled with formulas and little scribbles about my dream of becoming a doctor. Once I gathered the courage to speak up, I got into the State University's summer research program today. My dad didn't look up from the bread he was slicing, he just grunted. Luke laughed, chewing gum. "That for nerds or something?" My mom took a sip of water, set her glass down, and said lightly, coldly, "Evelyn, don't make it a thing. Your brother's already under enough pressure with sports. Don't make him feel inferior." I swallowed my ham and my rising bitterness. Not out of fear, but out of habit. I was too used to silence being the chosen response whenever I needed to be seen. Every award I earned was filed away in my bedroom drawer, while every one of Luke's football trophies was placed front and center in the living room, spotlighted by ceiling lights. Once I asked my mom why my national certificate wasn't hung up. She chuckled while doing the dishes and said, "We don't need to show off schoolwork. When you do something truly big, I'll be the first to celebrate." I remember sitting on my bedroom floor hugging the envelope that confirmed my full scholarship to Johns Hopkins like it was some dangerous secret. I didn't dare boast, didn't even whisper it, but one evening, while the whole family was watching TV, I left the letter on the kitchen counter, hoping someone would read it and maybe, just maybe, feel proud. That night, my mother walked into my room, not to hug me, not to congratulate me. She closed the door, sat on the edge of my bed like she was about to deliver a verdict. "Evelyn, I saw the scholarship letter," she said softly. I held my breath, waiting for acknowledgement, then she sighed. "I'm happy for you, but don't mention it around Luke. He just failed his athletic interview, and he's not in a good place. I don't want him to feel like he's falling behind." I blinked. "But I got into Johns Hopkins." "Yes, and that's great, but family comes first, Evelyn. And in this family, we don't hurt each other with things like that." I froze. Since when did my achievements become weapons? I went to class day and night, worked part-time to afford textbooks, practiced mock interviews alone, wrote essays without guidance, and when I finally reached my dream, the first thing they wanted was for me to bury it. No one had ever asked that of Luke. When he appeared on local TV after winning the district football championship, my parents threw a small party, invited the whole block. They even rented a projector to play his interview on the garage door. I was tasked with serving food and pouring drinks. No one asked about my national academic competition, or that I just advanced to the final round. I used to wonder if I did something wrong. Maybe I talked too much, studied too hard, wasn't charming enough. But the truth was simpler. I never made them proud in the way they wanted. I didn't play sports, I didn't joke around, I didn't have the easy smile. I only knew how to try, really try, and for them, that was a threat. As I grew older, I learned how to shrink myself. I packed away my joy, learned when to smile, when to nod, and never ever stand too tall just in case someone else felt small next to me. But deep down, I made a vow. One day I'd build a life that didn't require anyone's permission to shine. Not to make them proud, but to prove I didn't need them to have worth. That day came sooner than I expected, just not the way I pictured. My sophomore year of college, I had 2 backpacks, a partial scholarship, and a schedule packed with ER night shifts. Life back then revolved around stolen naps in the library, dinners of instant noodles next to open anatomy textbooks. No family dinners that semester, just a couple of dry texts from my mom asking if I still had the same number. Luke sent one photo, him standing next to his new pickup truck. Happy 21st to me. When winter break approached, I got a call from my mom. The family wants to have dinner, she said in a soft voice like she hadn't ignored me for nearly a year. Just a casual meal, nothing big. I hesitated, but part of me still clung to a little thread of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they'd changed. I came home on a light snow day. No one picked me up at the airport. I dragged my suitcase across icy sidewalks back to the house, where every piece of furniture was still in the exact same spot as if time had refused to move. Dad was polishing the wall clock. Mom was wrapping presents, and Luke was in front of the TV, gaming, not even looking up when I entered. "You're home," my mom said with a glance, then checked the time like I was late for something no one told me about. "Get dressed properly. Dinner's at 6. The dining room was set more carefully than I ever remembered. Linen tablecloth, scented candles, the silverware they only used on holidays. The smell of roast filled the kitchen. But something felt off. Too quiet, too rehearsed, like they'd been planning a scene without my lines in it. My father sat down first and gave a nod to start eating. No one asked about my classes, my job at the student hospital, the ER shift that left me collapsed in a restroom. They just talked about Luke as always. He'd been accepted into a special training program. My mother made him a custom nutrition plan. Dad was looking into police department contacts to give Luke some direction. When dessert arrived, my mother placed the pumpkin pie slice in front of me and said, "Evelyn, your father and I wanted to talk to you." I set down my spoon. My father pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. "Read this first." I opened it. My fingers trembled not from the cold but from something deeper. Inside was a completed application for a 2-year program at the local community college, nursing assistant training. Every field already filled out. Only the signature line remained blank. I looked up. "What is this?" My dad replied without pause. "It's the realistic path. Nursing is stable, less competition than being a doctor, comes with benefits, steady hours, and won't burn you out." I turned to my mom. She nodded as if this conversation had happened long before I showed up. "We know you're tired. We see the circles under your eyes. We worry about you. We want you to have a balanced life. Not one where you sacrifice everything for a medical degree." "You don't have to sacrifice," Dad added. "Not if you choose smart. If you sign this, we'll pay your tuition. You can move back in, save on living costs, focus, no pressure, no race to prove anything." I felt the chair beneath me vanish. Every sound in the room faded away, and then everything became crystal clear. They didn't believe in me, not that they once did and stopped. They never had. I took a deep breath. And what if I don't sign it? My father leaned back, took off his wedding ring and placed it on the table. The metal hit the wood with a dull, dry thud. "Then you leave this house too." No one yelled, no one cried, just silence, so heavy it pressed against my skin, so still I could hear the ticking clock in the corner. I stood up slowly without shaking. "All right," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "If that's the choice, then I've made mine." No one stopped me when I went upstairs. I pulled my old suitcase from under the bed, packed 2 sets of clothes, a thin jacket, and a box of certificates I'd hidden away. Inside were my Academic Excellence Award, a science essay prize, proof of attendance at a medical summer camp, and a letter of recommendation from a professor I admired. The only things that had ever validated me as someone other than Luke's shadow. As I dragged the suitcase down the stairs, my mother stood on the landing, her hand clenched around the banister. "You're really choosing outsiders over your own family." I didn't answer. That question didn't deserve one. The door clicked shut behind me with a sharp snap. The night was freezing. I had no plan, nowhere to go. $80 in my wallet. But to me, that was the first money I ever spent on freedom. I lived in a tiny room beside the fire escape on the 3rd floor of a run-down dorm building about a 40-minute walk from the student hospital. Every morning I got up earlier than the others, not to study more but to clock in at the cafe across the street. My uniform always smelled like burnt milk. My hands reeked of espresso, but the crumpled bills I tucked into a paper envelope meant more than the hours it took to earn them. I kept going to class, kept working ER shifts, kept learning to place 4S suture wounds, read a patient's condition by the look in their eyes. I had no extras, no time, no support system, no one to lean on when everything cracked. But I had resolve. And I believed that if I worked long enough, hard enough, some door had to open until the day one slammed shut, and I hadn't even noticed. During my 6th semester, I applied for a scholarship from a fund that supported med students with difficult backgrounds. Only 2 recipients were selected nationwide. I spent weeks perfecting that application, writing the essay until my hands cramped, correcting every typo, collecting letters from 3 doctors I had interned with. I'd printed backup copies, sent the application by certified mail, even kept a tracking number, and then nothing, no response, no rejection letter, no explanation. I told myself maybe I hadn't stood out, maybe someone else was more deserving. I forced myself to let it go, to keep working, to keep existing. It wasn't until 3 years later, while I was a resident researcher, that I ran into one of the coordinators from that scholarship fund at a Denver conference. She was chatting with a group of students. I recognized her name from old emails and went up to say hello. When I introduced myself, she squinted and tilted her head. "Evelyn Harper." "Hold on. Didn't you apply for our scholarship 3 years ago?" I nodded. My heartbeat slowed. She pulled out her phone and quickly checked the system. "Oh, but your application was withdrawn. We got a confirmation letter from someone. Looks like it came from an email address. Evelyn Harper Homepad at Gmail." I froze. I never created that email address. She looked at me a little confused. If I remember right, the letter said, "Thank you for considering my application, but I've decided to pursue other opportunities." Short and polite, nothing unusual. I thanked her, then walked out of that conference hall like I had no idea where I was going. The wind outside was so sharp it numbed my fingers, but the coldest thing I felt was in my chest. I searched every saved email I had from that time. Nothing. But I still had the hard copy of my application tucked in a folder at the bottom of my suitcase. And there it was, one tiny detail I had missed. The recipient address on the printout was my mother's old email, the one she used to help me keep track of documents during my freshman year. I had no direct proof, no camera, no witness. But I knew she had blocked me quietly, cleanly, deliberately, not with a scream but with a click. From that day forward, I began keeping everything. Not for revenge, but to protect myself from the feeling of losing my grip on reality. I bought a separate hard drive, saved every email copy, screenshot, recommendation letter, form, and professor's handwritten notes. I printed everything with my name on it, backed it up online and in real life, not to argue, just to stop doubting myself. Because after living in denial for so long, you start to believe every injustice is somehow your fault. I called it my existence file. That night I wrote in my journal, "They can pretend I was never here, but I'll live in a way no one can deny I was." And I did exactly that. I kept working even harder. I volunteered for night shifts, took the toughest ER cases, learned to communicate with patients just by reading their eyes. I no longer needed praise. I needed skill. I needed to stand on my own, even if no one ever stood behind me. And I stood solid, despite the shadows of people who once abandoned me lingering in the corridors of memory where they used to call me stubborn or the girl who doesn't know when to quit. But they were wrong. I didn't need to stop. I just needed to keep moving one step at a time with the truth resting quietly in my hands. I arrived in Chicago on a gray March morning, light rain falling, the streets still crusted with slushy snow. In my hand wasn't a glowing resume or a glowing recommendation letter from someone powerful, just a plain job offer from Southview City Hospital. Position, full-time emergency room physician, night shift. I didn't take the job for prestige or high pay. In fact, the salary was modest compared to university hospitals. But what this place offered was what I needed. No one knew me, no one expected anything, and no one had the history to erase me at first glance. I worked nonstop. My shifts usually started at 7 p.m. and ran until 7 a.m. From highway crashes to freezing homeless patients, from psychotic episodes to feverish toddlers in single mothers' arms, I saw it all. I didn't avoid difficult cases, whether angry, drunk, or dying. I approached every patient like they were the last person on earth who mattered. Little by little, the name Evelyn Harper began to be passed around among the nurses when calm was needed in chaos. Paramedics called me before the shift leader. Residents began asking me how to handle high-pressure scenarios. I never had to shout or bang on tables to be heard. I just kept doing things right again and again. I didn't smile much. I didn't talk about myself. During breaks, I often sat alone in the corner of the staff lounge, sipping cold coffee and editing research drafts. Part of me stayed guarded, not because I feared being rejected again, but because I'd learned that sometimes silence is power. When a national medical journal published my first article, a study on diagnostic disparities in cardiovascular care across minority populations, I didn't tell anyone at the hospital. I just printed a copy, folded it, and slipped it into the pocket of my white coat beside my red pen. That was it. 3 months later, when I received an invitation to speak at the National Emergency Care Conference, the department chief came up to my table in the lounge and placed a crisp white letter on the table. "Harper," he said, "they want you to open the conference, keynote speaker. Want me to write you a recommendation?" I shook my head. "Thanks, but they already know me." He nodded like he understood exactly what I wasn't saying. I stepped up to the stage in the auditorium wearing a perfectly pressed white coat, my hair neatly tied back, a set of notes in my hand, but I didn't need to look at them. I opened with a question. During a 12-hour shift, which patient will you remember most? The one who survived or the one you couldn't save? The entire room went silent. I looked straight at the front row where the professors, senior physicians, and even a few who once doubted doctors like me were seated. I didn't talk about myself. I spoke of sleepless nights, of decisions made within 30 seconds, and of moments when you have to push your feelings aside just to keep someone else's heart beating. After the speech, a young resident approached and shook my hand. "I read your article in Medical Equity Review," she said, her eyes bright. "You weren't just writing about medicine, you were writing about the silence in the system," and I felt seen. I simply smiled. Not out of pride, but because finally someone had recognized the part of me I'd built with my own hands. Recognition didn't come fast, didn't come loud, but it came steady. I was invited to sit on medical review boards, cited in textbooks, and entrusted with designing training protocols for new doctors. But I never posted anything on my personal social media. I didn't take photos with awards. I didn't speak of accolades because I no longer needed anyone's approval. The world would never let the world say my name. I began showing up in senior med student labs, not to teach, but to observe their practice, to correct a fumbled technique, to help recenter their judgment when panic crept into their eyes. Some students began thanking me in their thesis acknowledgments. Others emailed to ask if they could quote me in their essays. One day I opened my locker in the doctor's lounge and found a folded piece of paper someone had quietly left behind. "Thank you, Dr. Harper. I didn't quit because of you." I folded the note and tucked it into my journal. No one saw that moment, but it reached the deepest part of me. No spotlight needed, no applause required. I didn't become famous. I became impossible to ignore. I was finishing a post-op report when I got a message from the Southview Emergency Coordination Desk. Just 13 words. "Urgent consult, St. Agnes Hospital, San Antonio. Patient name, Luke Harper." I read it 3 times, my chest hollowing out like the air had been pulled from my lungs. No one from my family texted, no calls, no emails. But when my brother was in critical care with acute heart failure, it was the hospital that called me, the ER chief from Chicago, to consult on his treatment. I didn't ask why they chose me. I just closed my laptop, sent a quick message to my department head, heading to Texas. Emergency consult will update as needed. I grabbed my ID, coat, folder, and the little notebook I always kept in my drawer. I didn't pack anything personal, just business cards. The flight to San Antonio wasn't long, but every hour in the air stretched the weight in my chest. I stared out the small window, the city blurred beneath a veil of thin clouds. At times I wondered if I arrived too late, if Luke didn't make it, what would I feel? Anger, regret, or nothing at all? Stepping into the main lobby of St. Agnes Hospital, I was startled by the wave of familiarity, the scent of antiseptic, the hurried footsteps, the cold white light bouncing off stone floors. Years had passed, but this place hadn't changed. I had. I wore my consultant badge, coat crisp, file clutched tight under my arm. When I reached the ICU waiting area, I saw 2 familiar silhouettes. My father, Russell Harper, hunched over in a gray plastic chair, hands clasped tight. My mother stood near the window, spine straight as wire, holding a phone she wasn't looking at. They didn't see me approach. "Excuse me, are you Dr. Harper from Chicago?" a young nurse asked, her voice cautious but respectful. I nodded. "Yes, patient Luke Harper. I was called in for consult." She nodded briskly, flipping through her chart. "We've been expecting you. Room 3, please." This morning, the patient's condition shifted. Cardiac enzymes are unstable. Her voice echoed down the hallway, making my mother turn around. She froze for a few seconds as if seeing a stranger, as if unsure whether to look closer. "Evelyn?" she asked softly, but her voice trembled like a taut string struck off key. I didn't answer. I walked past them, nodded politely to the nurse, and pushed open the ICU door with a steady hand. Luke was there, pale on the hospital bed, and 4 in one arm and oxygen cannula under his nose. A staff physician stood nearby reviewing the monitor readings. He looked up when he saw me. "Dr. Harper?" he asked, extending his hand. I shook it. "Let me see the most recent ECG and the medications administered over the past 6 hours." We spoke in the sharp clinical language of medicine. Cool, precise, emotionless. I scanned the readings, recommended adjusting the dobutamine dosage, double-checked his blood pressure and pupillary response. Luke opened his eyes briefly. I couldn't tell if he recognized me, but that didn't matter. I treated him the same as any other critical heart failure patient, without hesitation, without memory clouding my decisions. When I was done, I handed the notes back to the primary physician, gave clear instructions for the next monitoring window, and stepped out. My father stood just outside. He didn't smile, didn't scold, didn't speak. Just that unreadable stare I knew too well. My mother still clutched her phone. "When did you get back?" she asked, voice wavering. Somewhere between nervous and hopeful. "I didn't come back. I was called in to treat," I said, not loud, not cold, just truth. Both fell silent. Then my father asked, barely audible, "Are you planning to stay?" I looked at him. For a second I thought I saw softness in his eyes, but I'd learned not to misread gestures. I handed the head nurse my business card. "If there are updates, call this number. Otherwise, coordinate through the attending physician." No one stopped me as I turned away. The door clicked softly behind me, like every slammed door I'd ever heard, except this time I was the one in control. No one erased my name. No one denied me. The entire hospital knew who I was before my family even picked up the phone. I walked away, not because they accepted me, but because I no longer needed their acceptance to exist. I left the hospital as the sun was starting to set, the sky streaked with orange like someone had dragged a brush across a wet canvas. My hotel was just a few blocks away, an old building with worn burgundy carpet and a faint scent of damp wood. I chose it not for comfort, but for silence. No questions, no recognition. I hadn't unpacked yet when my phone buzzed, a strange number from the San Antonio area code. I picked up, and a familiar voice spoke. "Evelyn, it's Mom. Are you still near the hospital?" I hesitated. "Why?" "Just a few minutes. I'm at the cafe near where you're staying." "If you're not busy," I didn't answer right away, but I knew if I refused, she'd call again or worse, show up. I pulled on my coat, slipped the key into my pocket, and headed outside. The cafe sat on the corner, its windows fogged up, a tiny bell chiming every time someone entered. My mother sat at a table near the window, holding her paper coffee cup like she was rehearsing a scene in her head. She wore a charcoal gray sweater, her hair neatly brushed, a faint trace of perfume. Everything about her looked like she was prepping for an interview. I pulled out the chair and sat down without taking off my coat. "Why did you call me, Mom?" She looked at me for a few seconds, then spoke softly. "It's about Luke. The doctors here aren't bad, but your hospital in Chicago. It has better equipment, a stronger team. If you could help transfer him, just say the word and things would go much smoother." I gently stirred the tea I just ordered, eyes fixed on the cup. "Did it not occur to you to ask me first before putting my name on Luke's medical paperwork?" She froze. "Your name's not on the record. I just hoped you'd consider for the family." I didn't respond. I let the silence settle between us like a curtain. Then I stood up and said simply, "You know how to contact my hospital if anything official is needed. Don't call me privately again." I walked out of the cafe, strangely hollow inside. Not angry, not surprised, just tired. Tired in a way that made every cell in my body feel like it was holding me together. That night, while reviewing remote scheduling for the research teams back in Chicago, I received an email from a government address. The subject line was simple: Medical Sponsorship Verification Request. Harper Evelyn M. I opened it. The message was short but clinical. They were requesting verification on whether I had sponsored a medical visa for a foreign national named Camila Rosas, listed as a dependent and family contact on the medical file of patient Luke Harper. Attached to the file were my name, my title, my medical license number, and a forged signature. I read it again and again. It felt exactly like that first time I found out someone had withdrawn my scholarship application on my behalf. But they hadn't just tried to stop me. They had used my identity as a launchpad for something else. I looked up the name Camila Rosas. She used to be Luke's girlfriend, someone who had spent time living in Brazil. I vaguely remembered her name showing up in a few old messages that were accidentally forwarded, but we'd never met. She was now in Texas on a temporary visa for medical treatment, signed and sponsored by me. I knew immediately who did it. The signature mimicked my slant but lacked the finish, and only one person in my family had ever handled a scanned copy of my signature back when she helped me with my scholarship paperwork in undergrad. My mother. I didn't call. I didn't ask. I opened my laptop and drafted a response to the Department of Immigration. Professional, clear, and precise. I, Evelyn Harper, MD, confirm that I have not sponsored any individual named Camila Rosas for medical or immigration purposes. The signature used was not made by me. I formally request an investigation and that my name be removed from all related documentation. I attached a scanned copy of my actual signature, my license, and a list of documents with official seals. Before hitting send, I took screenshots, saved everything, and added it to the folder I called the truth file, where I kept records of every time they bent my identity into something they could control. Not for lawsuits, not for revenge, just so that if anyone ever asked how I was betrayed, I wouldn't need to explain. I'd just open a file and say nothing. I received that email on a gray morning while revising the final draft of a proposal to improve patient intake procedures for Latinx populations at Southview. The subject line read, "Thought you should know," from Dr. L. Kaminsky. I almost skipped over it, assuming it was a conference invite, but the name stopped me. Kaminsky, my fourth-year community health research advisor. The message began in his usual tone, polite, measured, but with an undercurrent of unease I recognized instantly. I just finished reviewing this year's finalist applications for the National Community Health Collaboration Program. One of the essays that made it to the final round sounded very familiar. The topic was a model for improving healthcare access among undocumented labor communities. Didn't you send me a draft on that same theme about 7 years ago for feedback? I stopped reading. My hand involuntarily clenched the computer mouse. I went back through my old inbox and it's the same voice, same examples, even a direct quote I remember highlighting in my comments to you. There's no healing where patients don't feel they have a right to exist. I'm not saying this to accuse anyone, but the essay was signed Luke Harper. I felt like I'd been thrown into a freezing tank. I sat upright, hands trembling so badly I had to grip the edge of the chair. I read it again, every word sinking into me like needles. I knew every sentence in that essay. Each paragraph rooted in experiences I had lived, witnessed, and written down with my own skin and breath, while interning at the free clinic on the corner of Westbridge. Luke had never set foot in that place. He never heard a Mexican patient speak of the fear of deportation during an emergency. Never treated an elderly Haitian woman with no insurance. Never stayed up all night gutted by a system that worked against its own. But I had shared the essay with him. Back then, I still believed we could connect one rare evening I'd stopped by the house to grab a few things. Luke glanced over at my desk, saw the draft, and asked what I was working on. That night, he actually seemed interested. He asked why I chose the topic, asked about my patients, the ethical conflicts I'd faced. I was happy, maybe even proud. I let him read the draft. "You can hang on to it, just give it back tomorrow," I remember saying. He never gave it back, and I never asked. A few months later, I got busy with surgical rotations, moved apartments. I forgot about the paper. The project never received funding that year due to budget cuts. I folded it up and moved on. But Luke, I never imagined he kept it. Not just kept it, but changed the name, submitted it, and got awarded a prestigious recognition for community innovation, followed by a feature interview on the organization's website. I Googled his name. The article came up first. Luke Harper, a young medical voice with deep humanitarian vision. The caption under his photo read, "Founder of Clinic Without Borders, a healthcare initiative for underserved migrant workers." Clinic Without Borders. That was the exact title I had used in my draft essay's introduction. I leaned back in my chair, heartbeat dull and heavy. In my head, I heard my mother's voice from years ago. Luke just needs the right guidance. He'll get there. So that was her idea of guidance, stealing my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt still like a winter lake, smooth on the surface, frozen to the bone. I opened the truth file folder, pulled out the original essay draft, still marked up with Kaminsky's comments. I scanned the article about Luke, circling every sentence that mirrored mine word for word. I saved everything in a new file, named it Truth No Denial. I didn't send a confrontation email, didn't make a call because I knew that if I did, they'd say I was too sensitive, holding a grudge, misunderstanding family. I didn't need an apology. I only needed to preserve the truth for myself, for the day someone might ask if I really lived what I claimed to. When the dust settled, I sat down and opened a blank page, not to defend myself, but to write again for me, under my own name, one they couldn't take anymore. The auditorium was silent enough to hear my heartbeat in the microphone. I stood on stage at the National Conference on Health Equity, the spotlight cutting across me from the left, casting a long shadow onto the silver-gray backdrop. There was no printed speech. I didn't read from notes. I just spoke in my own voice. There are people in this room, I began, looking toward the unnamed rows who know exactly what it feels like to enter a space where every eye looks past you as if you're invisible. Not because you did something wrong, but because you don't fit the picture they've already drawn. I didn't mention my mother. I didn't mention Luke. I didn't say the word family, but everyone understood. I spoke about ER shifts in clinics where immigrants were too afraid to say where it hurt because they feared being deported. I talked about a Haitian girl without insurance standing beside her mother's bed, asking in broken English, "Will my mom get the machine if we don't have money?" I spoke about what it felt like to pour your heart into an essay only to watch someone else wear your words and step onto a stage as if they were made from their own skin. Some things don't need recognition to be real, I said, my voice growing quiet. Some journeys are worth living, even if no one claps. No one moved when I stopped. Not a single cough, not the scrape of a chair, just silence. But this time, it wasn't the kind of silence that had once drowned me. This was the silence of being heard. I took a deep breath, then closed with, I stopped asking for a seat at the table I was never invited to. I built my own and people like me, the ones pushed aside. We're not ghosts, we're the foundation. As I stepped down, the applause started slowly, then rose like a wave. I didn't bow, I just nodded, thanked them with my eyes, and walked down the side aisle to avoid the crowd. Backstage, a woman with brown hair, glasses, and a blue plaid shirt approached me. She didn't introduce herself right away. She just said, "I'm a reporter for an independent medical journal, but I didn't come here to write. I came because of your piece last year about silence and inpatient care. I cried when I read it. But today, when I heard you speak, I realized I wasn't just crying for the article. I was crying for myself. I didn't answer immediately. I gently placed a hand on her shoulder and smiled. Not the kind of smile that brushes things off, but a real one. Because for the first time, someone wasn't seeing me as accomplished. They were seeing me as human. Before I could leave, a young woman approached. She wore a white coat, soft curls framing her face, barely past her 20s. She held a dog-eared notebook with a printed copy of my article tucked inside. "I read your piece," she said softly, the one about those sitting at the edge of the treatment circle. "I'm the child of undocumented immigrants. I saw my mom turned away once because she didn't have insurance. I went to med school to change that, but by second year I nearly gave up. Then I read your article and I stayed." I looked at her and said nothing because in that moment words were unnecessary. I used to think healing meant hearing the words sorry from my mother. I used to believe that if Luke ever came back and said thanks for letting me read that essay, I'd feel lighter. But standing there in that hallway between two strangers, I knew one thing clearly. I no longer needed anyone from my old family to see me because the world had already looked at me and seen me fully, and that was enough. That night, I returned to my hotel room, took off my coat, made a cup of peppermint tea, and sat by the window. The city lights below blurred through the glass, windows glowing like scattered heartbeats of those still awake, still trying. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't write anything new. I just flipped to the last page of an old notebook where the words I once wrote had begun to fade. "If they don't listen, I'll make the world listen for me." I quietly underlined the word will, then added one more. Did. That Sunday morning, the air was cool. Wind brushed past the trees lining the park path like it was whispering something old that had never been said aloud. I pulled on a light sweater and walked slowly along a trail paved in golden leaves. Autumn in Chicago always carried the scent of damp earth, fallen foliage, and memories that didn't need names. Near the playground, a family was taking photos. The father knelt behind the camera. The mother adjusted their daughter's collar. The little girl giggled, throwing her arms into the air like joy was a natural reflex. I paused, not from envy, not from longing, but because in that second I realized I'd stopped searching for my place in a picture-perfect family photo. I used to dream of a photo like that. I used to wish someone had stood beside me on graduation day, arm around my shoulder, pride in their eyes. But the empty spaces in that frame taught me that some things, if not given from the start, aren't worth chasing back. And I didn't need a photo to prove I once belonged to their family. When I got home, the mail tray in the lobby held a single envelope. No return address, no postmark, just thick paper folded neatly with a newspaper clipping from a local Texas publication tucked inside. The headline read, "Luke Harper named this year's Young Community Icon." Below was a photo of Luke in a suit shaking hands with the mayor, my mother standing behind him, eyes gleaming like she'd never done a thing wrong. Underneath the article, in a familiar, careful handwriting, definitely my father's, were the words, "Still better than you." I held the clipping, a cold tide washing over my chest. Not sharp, not painful, just the final touch from someone who'd long been dead in my heart. I didn't crumple it, didn't shred it into pieces like I had with old letters. I simply folded it in half, walked to the trash can near the window, and dropped it in. Light, clean, final. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel disappointed. Just stillness, like the surface of a lake, undisturbed, because I knew they didn't write that for me. They wrote it to protect an old order where I would always be the one expected to stay quiet. But I hadn't stayed quiet. I walked into the kitchen, boiled water, brewed cinnamon tea, and poured it into the small ceramic mug etched with a quote I once wrote in my college journal. "If they won't listen to me, I'll make the world listen." I had written that line as a vow. But now I said it again as a confirmation. The world had heard me. The patients who called my name when they were dying, the students who asked to quote my research, the colleagues who added my paper to their residency curriculum. I didn't need a family to say my name. I had a community that said it with truth. That afternoon, I returned to the park where the little family had been earlier. The leaves kept falling in waves, layering the ground. A boy rode his bike past, a laughing grandfather jogging behind him. I suddenly remembered Mr. Thomas, the security guard at the first community hospital where I ever worked. He once said to me after I broke down in tears from a patient's refusal, "You don't need everyone to love you, just the right ones." I sat down on a wooden bench beneath a tree. The scent of cinnamon tea still clung to my scarf. I leaned back, exhaled slowly. I didn't forgive, I just chose peace, and for me, that was enough.